So I'm not so much talking about faith in Jesus or in some particular religious character or dogma or anything like that, but it's much more a sense of I like to refer to it as a sense of mystery, actually.
Hello and welcome, fellow human. My name is Zachary Stockill, and you are listening to Humans in Love, a podcast that looks at culture, relationships, and personal development from unconventional perspectives. Join me as I dig into the question of how people like you and I might get more out of life and love. Thanks for being here. Hello, friends. Welcome to another episode of Humans in Love. I've got a good one for you today. As always, I am talking to Blandine Wegener. Blandine is one of my yoga teachers here in Chiang Mai. She's been practicing Tantra yoga for well over a decade, and she is easily one of the most knowledgeable and insightful women I've ever met with regards to relationships, intimacy, sexuality, and all those good things that you probably heard us talk about in my first episode on Tantra back with her co-teacher, Mr. Uriel Yariv. That was back on episode 14. Blandine is Uriel's partner as well as his co-teacher here. And in today's episode, we go deeper into many of the themes that we covered in episode 14, but with Blandine's own take on her spiritual journey, what Tantra means to her, and how she came to be walking the Tantric path. Before we get into it, I'll remind you that ratings, reviews, subscriptions are absolutely crucial for any podcast success. So if you dig Humans in Love, please be sure to subscribe to the show. And while you're at it, why not let others know? Please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or your podcast app of choice. Without any further ado, I present to you Miss Blandine Wegener. I'm very curious how you came to be walking this particular path. Have you always had an interest in spirituality? You grew up in Germany, right? And I can't imagine you being exposed to a lot of tantric ideas growing up in Germany. Or were you?
Well, actually, to be precise, I grew up in communist Germany for the first part of my childhood.
East Germany?
East Germany.
Oh, interesting.
And not much Tantra there, as you can imagine. Basically, I mean, if we are already on this note of spiritual awakening, I must say that actually I feel like I came out this way a little bit, just like feeling extremely connected to the universe around me and just having already states of divine ecstasy when I was a child. And I was actually always very fond of going to church, believe it or not. My parents were not, so they would stay home on Sunday and sleep in, and I would go on my little red bicycle.
In East Germany?
To the church, yeah.
So what was that like? Because I've read conflicting accounts of, how okay the East German government was with religious organizations.
Yeah, not at all okay.
Right.
So like if you were part of the church or just going regularly or having anything to do with it, then you would be immediately under surveillance. And my parents were anyways under surveillance because they were part of what was called the intelligence, which is people that studied. And so anyways, we had a car parked in front of our house very often with people surveilling us. So that was just a little add-on. And then anyways, I just started school when the war came down. And then I continued going to church also in Western times. So it didn't make that much of a difference.
Do you think that's why your parents didn't like going to church? Because they were concerned about sort of upsetting the local government even more? Or?
I think it's more they got more lazy after the war came down, because before the war came down, they were very interested in going to church because it was like a way to oppose. It was a way of rebellion. So they would actually go to a lot of demonstrations and be sure to be very visible in church and so on to make a point. But then, I just continued going after the war came down. And they also continued to go every now and again, but not with the same enthusiasm that I had. Yeah, and I just loved it. I just loved sitting there in church and singing, and I just had this feeling that I'm surrounded by a divine force somehow that was not so much related to the particular setting of the church, but it was just one way to sort of express my connection with the divine. And then eventually, of course, I grew up to be a teenager, and then I hated the church, obviously, for a while. Of course, also for the difficulties in history that we cannot just ignore. But eventually, I just couldn't ignore that. I just felt God in my heart. I just felt it. I just felt that there's an all-encompassing divine power within everyone and everything, and I have it in me and everyone has it in them. And for me, it was just obvious. So I sort of couldn't deny that. So I was a bit exploring as a teenager and just seeing other philosophies and flirting a bit with Buddhism, because that was like a hip thing at that time.
Did you read Siddhartha?
Yes, I did. As a teenager, actually.
Hermann Hesse?
Say again?
Hermann Hesse, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's a German must-read somehow if you're interested in the field. And eventually in the beginning of my 20s, I moved to Berlin to study. And I was very much in an inner search. And it was coming to a place where it was really shaking me somehow. It was such a need to understand the universe and to just come to some sort of conclusion with all these big feelings and states that I had inside regarding the divine somehow. So I would still go to church and I would try out a lot of different things just to sort of get an outlook of what is there. And I had actually one door in my room at that time when I was studying, and it was like a blind door, so it had like shelves behind it. And then inside of that door, I would open it, and inside I would have the plan of how I thought the universe works. So I would like read a philosophy book and then add a little bit something there, or have like some understanding while sleeping under the stars or something, and then add it there. So I had my little world, universal view behind that door hidden. And then when I came the first time to the yoga class, actually that belongs to the system of schools that I'm still part of and teaching now here in Thailand, I just recognized, I was like, this is what I have behind my door. Like they are just explaining it with so much more detail and with the possibility to practice and to put it into a methodology and actually start moving on this path that I already felt so clearly in my heart. So when I met the school, for me, it was probably one of the most boring yoga classes I ever had. It was not very well taught. Nevertheless, it was very, very touching for me to just feel that this is a place where I'm understood and where all this knowledge that I sort of intuitively feel in my heart is answered to and is put so clearly and is referred to old texts and so forth. And it was actually by the grace of a friend of mine that I was living with. And he was already going to that same yoga class for some time. And he was really intrigued. And he told me every single day, look, this is really your thing. You should go there. You should check it out. But at that time, I was not at all into it. I was riding motorbikes and taking lots of drugs and just being completely rebellious, crazy lady. And I was like, no, come on, I go there, stretch myself with some silly fitness ladies. I'm not interested. But he was very persistent. So for half a year, just like a few times per week, he would tell me, look, really, really, come, this is your place. And then I told him, okay, I'm going to go there once just so that he shuts up. And I did, and I never stopped. I just went there and I immediately fell in love with the path. I remember coming out of that class and just seeing light everywhere. It was such a clear moment of reckoning somehow.
If you had to pinpoint it or boil it down, what was it that grabbed you so intensely? What do you think it was?
Well, if I may be a little bit cheesy about it, I feel it was really like just recognizing that this is what I have to do in my life. This is my purpose. This is where I belong. This is my, even if you will, spiritual family. and I just belong to this path and to this community. This was the deepest feeling inside. Apart from that, of course, also my mind was intrigued because it was just offering so much knowledge and interesting correlations that I had thought of before, but that I didn't have so clear somehow in my mind. So having the combination of a lot of knowledge, which for me is very intriguing, with this very clear feeling of, okay, this is it. You don't have to search any further. Just, park yourself here, follow your purpose, and you'll be good in this life somehow. That was the feeling.
And just to nail it down a little bit more, the podcast I did with Uriel, your co-teacher, we talked a little bit about some of the fundamental tantric principles. But do you remember even back then some of the initial ideas or principles or philosophies that really had an impact on you?
Yeah, I guess also as Uriel mentioned in the podcast, the thing that really struck me was that many of the ideas that I had come up with myself, but also read in books around love, that they were just so clearly and practically and even implicitly incorporated into the teaching. It was even like, I don't remember anyone talking a lot about love in the first few weeks or month even of the course, maybe on the side when I was asking things about it, but not in the course directly. And yet I just felt it. I just felt, okay, this is coming from exactly that place of heart that I was always looking for. And I remember having these many revelations before entering into the yoga path, so to say, around how love works and how somehow by love we are all connected, and by having a heart, we are sort of all like a little center of the universe. I had all these visions around that, and then all of a sudden it was all falling into place with this focus upon entering the heart, and Tantra really being a path of the heart, where the whole first stage of the path is just about, okay, come and find your soul and enter into your heart, and from there everything else will unfold. And I guess that was the most intriguing for me.
I know I'm really trying to narrow this down. When you talk about entering into your heart, what does that mean to you?
Mm-hmm. So I want to first mention a little bit, let's say, the traditional background, just to understand it a bit better as a feeling, because obviously the feeling can only be conveyed this much in words. But basically, the idea, not just in Tantra, actually in quite a few systems, of entering into your heart, or sort of what is also called the step of awakening your soul, is basically a step where you are moving from the linear and mentally dominated way of thinking and perceiving yourself and the world around you into a much more, I like to call it, spherical way of perceiving yourself, because this is sort of how it feels to me mostly. So if I think of my normal perception when I'm just in my everyday state of mind, then I have this linear unfolding, a bit like a computer. So, okay, I wake up in the morning and this is my timeline of the day, and I perceive myself somewhat separated from the universe, of course, also with some connective points, but they are very clearly drawn in. So it's somehow quite, let's say, a bit more the scientific approach, let's say, from the mechanical viewpoint, the scientific approach of feeling and seeing yourself, and even thinking in that way, okay, I will now first find out about what John is doing on midday, so I can understand if we can have lunch together, so I can understand if I schedule my next appointment after that, so and so forth. It's like a linear unfolding within time and within the entire understanding of the being. And then moving towards this, what I like to call more spherical perception of self, where what is fundamentally understood in Tantra, we are accomplishing the step of going from perception of ourselves as ego to perception of ourselves as soul. The first thing that happens is that this linear way of thinking and perceiving just collapses into a sort of unified perception of things. So when I'm in such a state, I might look at a certain person or at a certain object and then perceive that somehow removed from the linear and especially from the timeline that it might normally be incorporated in. So instead of looking at that lamp over there and being like, okay, now it's 2 years old, and then eventually it will decompose and become particles again and so forth. That's like a timeline of looking upon this object. But if I look at this object and come from this heart space, as I would like to call it, or from the soul, then I would somehow see all the significances that this lamp has. Like, what is its meaning? What is its purpose? All the moments in time connected to this thing, to that object, somehow come together in the now and are even readable in the now, understandable in the now. So that somehow the understanding of that object becomes much larger. And it might sound not so relevant for our normal way of living life, of getting up in the morning and doing our chores and whatnot. But when it comes to acquiring, let's say, a new, I don't want to necessarily call it spiritual perspective, but just a new perspective or a more meaningful perspective upon life, then moving to that space where you can sort of access that is absolutely meaningful. It's like giving you completely new glasses that you look through at the world somehow.
So moving from sort of a chronological, mechanical view of things and objects and people to a more kind of timeless view of them. How does this way of seeing and perceiving the world impact relationships? And you can get as personal or not as you want. Like, how does this paradigm impact relationships?
Tremendously, as you can imagine. If you just think about it, any relationship that you had in your life, no matter if it's a friendship or a romantic connection or your parents or whatever it is, and you sort of zoom out from the normal way of looking upon those people, which, if we are being honest about it, is somewhat objectifying them and us. It's a little bit like, okay, I'm like one figure on the big game of life there, and then there's another figure there, which is my father or my lover or my friend. And then we are sort of moving as figures currently in a similar space on that big board of life somehow. This is a little bit the perception that we have. Even then objectifying the other as, okay, so right now this person is also a beautiful person, we can agree to that, but how I'm sort of categorizing that person in my mind is a bit like, this is the one that I do such and such with. So, for example, this is my parents, and they are here to nurture me and to raise me and to give me money when I need it. Or they are here to nag me and to annoy me, and so I have an opposition to talk against. Or this is my friend, and this is the person I call when I have relationship troubles, and this is the person I call when I need to move my house, and this is the person that I call when I need sex. And now I'm exaggerating, of course, but there's something in our mind that sort of categorizes ourselves and other people around us. And now when we move out of this space of constrained to this, let's say, more separated viewpoint, and we come to a place where we feel, well, wait a second, if I'm moving out of the timeline and all of a sudden I perceive everything that was ever with this person, everything that connects us, everything that brings meaning and purpose to our lives by being in interaction, the appreciation of that person is completely different. It's different to think, okay, this is the person that I can gossip with, or if you have a perception of, wow, this is a soul that I've been around with for maybe even many, many lives, if that is something that you can perceive. And they have this meaning in my life. They inspire me in this way, and I'm inspiring in that way. And all of a sudden, you have a unifying factor between the two. And this is something that Tantra keeps underlining, that everything must come from the heart, because the heart is the unifying space of everything.
What do you mean by that?
It's like just removing the idea of, let's say, a solidified me, which is the idea of ego, right? Just removing that idea, even just, sometimes we have these beautiful moments when we see a breathtaking research. For example, lately I was looking at a research that was suggesting somehow with what frequency, actually the atoms and the substance of our body changes up, simply just calculating how many liters per day we breathe and we eat and we drink, and then sort of estimating that our weight stays the same, in what a fast period of time we actually have a full turnover of elements, of just atoms in our being. And just such research is usually something that for people is like, wow, it's mind-boggling, really, or maybe it makes you doubtful and tense. And it sort of shows how we are usually going around with somewhat of a shell, with somewhat of a solidified idea of me and not me, right? And then when you just remove that one idea, you don't have to change in any other way, but you just take out this idea of separation. You just take out this idea that you are somewhat an isolated part of this universe that is just trying to move through and getting the best out of it. But all of a sudden, you just perceive on a day-to-day basis, in every little moment of your life, that you are in connection. You just eat that oatmeal and you're in connection. And you meet that beautiful person that you never met before and you are in connection. Just already this little change, it usually makes a big difference in people's life regarding their happiness and also regarding their, let's say, appreciation for themselves, for others, and for life itself, just because they're in touch all of a sudden.
Yeah, I'm curious to pin down more how that idea, how you make sense of that idea, because I'll say personally, I like to think about the Big Bang. When I was like 19 or 20, I got very, very, very interested in Zen Buddhism and the work of Alan Watts. And he talks a lot about the Big Bang. And so how that has impacted me is if I'm annoyed with someone, or if I'm having a challenging time with someone, or I'm frustrated or whatever, I think about the Big Bang. And I think about that we all come from that central place, billions of years ago out in the galaxy. So I think for me, that's how that, practically in terms of day-to-day life, I find that concept really helpful. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, you're talking about something that's more heart-centered, perhaps, than what I'm talking about. Like, how do you use this idea in daily life, and how would you express it and flesh that idea out a little more?
Mm-hmm. So actually, I like very much this analogy with the Big Bang. It's probably one of the most scientist-tolerant ways of looking upon such a somewhat maybe hippie type of concept.
Yeah, our Western rational mind likes that, right? It's
yes.
Like, yeah, that one's very comfy to embrace that idea.
Yes, and it's actually a wonderful, even, I don't want to say proof, but like point of how very often science and these more mystical things, they sort of overlap. Because the Big Bang is a wonderful way of understanding, okay, wait a second, if we all came from that one little tiny hot altogether bunch of mass, of matter, then obviously we must be somewhat connected, right? And that's a beautiful idea to start from. And then as I see it, such a moment of having this understanding, just becoming aware in one moment, okay, wait a second, we might be having a fight or there might be a problem right now, but actually we all came from that one little thing. And then frustration dissipates. That's a moment of tapping into that heart space that I was talking about, that, let's say, dimension of ourselves that is anyways never separated. So something in us, and if you went into Zen Buddhism, then you know this idea, something in us always stays the same, is always unified with the universe. Alan Watts actually said at one point, in the same way like apple tree apples, the universe peoples. Yeah, exactly. And that's a very, very beautiful and also, of course, intimidating idea, somewhat, to understand this principle. So when you tap into that moment of, okay, the Big Bang, all right, connected with everything, that's your gateway somehow into the soul. And what happened for me at one point, actually before I entered the path fully and with guidance and so forth, is that I had many of those moments where I just became aware, wait a second, I do feel connected. When I'm not in my head, when I'm not arguing and being frustrated and suffering or whatever other things I keep myself busy with, then actually I do feel connected. When I just pause just for 1 second and I just become, I don't even want to say centered into the now, just present, just a little bit, then immediately this entering into this heart space somehow happens. And then it's just a matter of somehow staying there. For me, one of the most powerful things before I came to the yoga, I was sleeping on a terrace under the stars in Berlin. It was amazing, and I would lie there every night, and I would look at the stars or at the moon, whatever was in front of me, and I would have sort of my hands in front of my chest as I was lying down, and I was pushing, as if pushing space, and then becoming aware, okay, if I push space like 1 meter in front, then it's pushing against the moon. And it was freaking me out. It was making me so happy, just this very simple thought, which is sort of fairy tale type of thought, but it also just made so much sense in that moment. Like I felt that connection. I would lie there and just feel how I'm touching the mattress, and the mattress is touching the floor, and the floor is touching the house, and the house is touching the earth, and the earth is touching my mother's house, or my friend's house, or my lover's house, and their bed, and their mattress, and them. And then I would just feel, it's just an illusion that we are apart from one another. We are just continuously united. And it would just sort of switch me into this heartful state. And then what occurred actually just before, like maybe a half a year before I came to the path of yoga, was that what I know now is I entered into a state of soul awakening for a few months, and it was continuous. I was continuously in this state of feeling all connected with everything around. I would put my hand on the table, and it was nearly like an orgasm, touching the table and just feeling how the atoms of my hand are blurring with the atoms of the table. And I would continuously be in a state of meditation of these sensations. And that was enough to basically put me into one of the most mystical states that you can think of, this continuous awakening of the soul. Simple things like walking down a staircase and touching the handrail and just feeling how there's a connection between me and the handrail. Or riding on my bike through Berlin and seeing a signpost, and just as I'm coming closer to the signpost, just feeling, meditating even, not knowing what I'm doing, upon how the space is getting smaller between us. And then as I leave the signpost behind, because I'm riding further, it's growing again, but I remain connected to that signpost no matter what. So all of these ideas, and you will find actually in one of the most valued tantric texts, which is the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra, that all the meditation techniques that are suggested there to enter into the highest states of consciousness, they are nothing but such meditations. For example, 2 objects, meditate upon the space in between. What does it do? It makes you understand everything is connected in a very direct way, without somebody telling you and then you have to sing a rainbow song about it, but just perceiving it. Yes, they are connected. There's an object and there's an object and there's space in between. And this sort of switches us out of the state of mind that is in separation continuously.
You were talking about a period of a few months where I think you called it your particular period of soul awakening, and you felt extraordinarily connected to everything and everyone. What prompted that? Was it it almost sounds like you were experimenting with psychedelics or something, the way you describe it, but what prompted that?
Yeah, so thank God I also had extensive self-research on using psychedelics, so I know how it's different.
I knew it.
But that's what was actually not what prompted the state. It was actually in a period where I stopped taking drugs and I stopped drinking alcohol, not because I felt I must, it just happened. I just felt, okay, this is my time to sort of just be more with myself. And I was allowing myself for the first time in my life to just be for a bit and just do, minimal work at the university and minimal things at home and just keeping everything very simple and taking a lot of time just being. And I wouldn't do that in a sort of, passive or lazy way, but I would do it very actively. So even if I would run a little chore or something, I would aim to be in that and just be fully present in that. And by some wonderful, graceful crossroad, I ended up really falling in love with that type of state, just contemplating being and contemplating the nature of things directly without needing to know and read and sort of drill something into my mind. But just, I had this intuition that if I just perceive now what is happening, then I will know everything, which is actually something that you find written in the tantric text, and not just there, actually in several traditions. This is a clear point. And from this continuous practice, I launched somehow into that state of soul awakening. And the actual moment of that happening, it was a pretty clear moment. Like I recall, I was sitting at the edge of a lake, and one of my friends, she wanted to go swimming, and she was all bubbly and sweet and crazy, and I was just with her somehow. And I felt already diving into this silence that you also described earlier, that you sort of dive into when you start to practice spiritually. And even though she was so lively and so on, it was just something that I contemplated. It was nearly like, if you want to refer back to Uriel's talk, like a polarization between life around me and my own consciousness observing it. And I had trained it somehow for several months now already, just observing, feeling, pushing against the moon and so on. That then, sitting there at the edge of the lake, some sort of critical mass was reached. And all of a sudden it was just like somebody took a shade from my eyes. And I felt clearly I will never see the world in the same way. It was just like looking over the rim of your plate, and you can never ever go back and just pretending the world is just a plate, right? But it came to such an extent, it was not just a moment of revelation where, yes, okay, now I understand this more and I can never go back to not understanding it, but it was like revealing a completely new way of seeing the world. All of a sudden I felt one with the water, with her swimming there, with the sky, everything sort of blended into oneness somehow. And then that state just stood with me for several months, and I would just sometimes exit it a little bit, but it just took a conscious touching of the table, or just becoming aware that I'm sitting on a chair that is touching the floor, and I would re-enter that state. So it was actual practice, but I was not aware that I was practicing.
During this period, how social were you? Did you make an effort to spend a lot of time by yourself, or yeah?
It was actually very interesting, because my entire understanding of my social needs completely switched, because I noticed already before that it agitates me a lot to miss out. Like I had a major fear of missing out. And
how old are you in this period, roughly?
Like when I had this first soul awakening, I was 22. And in the year before, I started to observe myself quite a lot and sort of have more and more understandings of myself, and just perceiving time spontaneously in a different way. As I said, I had already these awakening moments when I was a child, and they just seemed to deepen in this period that I sort of was out in life and just, starting to engage with the universe around me on a much larger scale than I was when I was living with my parents. And somehow this social need and sort of feeling that I always need to be the last leaving the table, and I always need to sort of make an effort to fit in. I mean, I was never like blending in with everything, but I would find my place, which was a bit more of a louder and a bit more enthusiastic place, but still I would make an effort to fit into that group and to find my loud, enthusiastic place in that group. And somehow, when this period started with the soul awakening, I just noticed very naturally a lot of these agitations and desires and apparent needs, which were not real deep needs, just falling away. And all of a sudden, there would be a full party going on, and I would just feel like, you know what? I'm complete. It's good. It's enough. And it was not like coming from a superior place or anything like that, and oh, look at me, I'm so spiritual. Not at all, because I was not at all in touch with this type of world. So I would just feel I'm fulfilled. That's good. Now I'm going home. And then I would be very, very fulfilled being alone. And somehow automatically I would spend more time alone, just because I wouldn't have anymore this urge to sort of fulfill this social part of things. And I felt that actually my relationships and my overall like the whole social game, the way I perceive people, the way they perceive me, it just became so much easier. because I just stopped trying. I was just myself, and all of a sudden people perceived me as much more radiant and happy and feminine, and like there was so much positive feedback, and they were like, what's going on with you? Like, who is this new you? And I was like, I don't know, I'm just myself. Like, I'm just discovering how I can just live life without all these tensions around it.
I'm thinking about the conversation so far, and I'm imagining someone listening to this, hearing about your experience, and you mentioned that you've had a lot of these experiences ever since you were a small child. And I imagine someone might think, oh, well, this way of being in the world, this paradigm, whatever you want to call it, it's something you're born with, which I don't believe, and I know you don't believe either. I think, there are practical ways to be in this state more often. For someone intrigued by this idea that you're talking about, this way of being in the world, do you think are some first steps? What are some practices that are helpful in this regard?
Yeah. So I want to make it very clear here that I wasn't born enlightened or anything like that. But one, let's say, talent that I came with was to have general curiosity for life, to be very open to life, and to have faith. I was just born with faith. And this is, of course, a tremendous quality to have. And actually then meeting Uriel and understanding how it can be to come into this path without any faith, because for him it was the total opposite, was very interesting for me to see. Nevertheless, the point was, faith or not, you can only really enter the path if you practice. And with this, in this regard, we are all equal somehow.
Before you continue, I want to pause, because faith is a word that brings up mixed emotions in me. What does that word mean to you? Like, when you use it in this context, what are you getting at?
Mm-hmm. So I'm not so much talking about faith in Jesus or in some particular religious character or dogma or anything like that, but it's much more a sense of I like to refer to it as a sense of mystery, actually, just being open to perceive that there is a lot more than meets the eye. There is a lot more than we know. And actually one of the major practices in Zen and some Zen currents is to contemplate that you know nothing. And this can just catapult you into a complete mystical union with everything, right? So this faith that I'm talking about is more of an openness to perceive that mystery, like a willingness to just put a question mark, to just say, really? Am I sure that I am not this wall over there? Am I sure that nothing is connected? Am I sure that it has to only be that way? Am I sure that I only am because I think? Am I sure? Really? So somehow to have this curiosity. And I must say that actually for me, many of the very renowned and genius characters from science, for me, they prove to be one of the most faithful people, because they keep asking this and keep reaching out into the mystery. And they, for example, prove their faith by keeping up the search, by continuously, rediving into the mystery of the everything. And I feel this is what faith actually is. It's not about this so-called blind faith of following a certain dogma or being like, yeah, Jesus is real, great. Not so much that, but much more the openness towards the universe. And it is a gift that some people come with, and I'm one of the lucky ones. And for some people, they sort of have to work on that. They just have to come to a place of observing long enough to tap into the mystery, because it becomes very obvious when you start watching things and when you start understanding how little we know. There's no way of missing the mystery somehow.
Absolutely. And I identify 100% with everything you just said about the curiosity, and I love the mystery of life. I always have. And I would never associate the word faith with that. So you've given me something to think about. That's interesting. But I interrupted you. You were talking about, or I was asking you about ways for people to inhabit this way of being, sort of practical ways that, people can inhabit this paradigm a little more.
Yeah. So, as I said, I feel the key into making this whole thing that we talked about, not just a fancy idea or some sort of interesting thing to flirt with, but making it a real thing that always requires systematic practice. And there's just no way around it. Not for the ones that were born with I don't know how many samadhi states, ecstasy states in their childhood, or seeing the light coming out of the mountains, or I don't know what. Also those will need to practice. All of us need to come to a place of being systematic about it. Like with everything in life, like if you want to have a good business, you need to be systematic about it. You don't have to be pedantic, but systematic at least. If you want a good relationship, you need to be systematic about it, even if people think that might kill all the fun and the juice. But no, you can be systematic about being spontaneous, for example. And it's the same here. You need to be systematic and really wanting to explore that. And just the mere wish of wanting to explore life as it is, the direct perception of life as it is, already that will launch you into such an exploration and sort of cover quite a bit of the path. And such practices could, of course, be anything that allows you to be very aware. May that be a very aware and focused yoga practice, or may that be meditating, may that be contemplating nature and being very, very lucid, very aware in that. May that be walking the street and being very aware in that. May that be cleaning the toilet and being very aware in that. Any systematic exploration of awareness will lead to this eventually. And now, of course, we shouldn't fool ourselves, because we can sort of put our mind on the semi-autopilot where it says, yes, okay, I got the point, you want to be aware, let me be aware for you. And then we go back to sleep and sort of just put the mind on the job. We do that in meditation quite often. You might have noticed that there's this temptation of just saying, yeah, okay, I got the point what to focus on, so, mind take over and I'm going back to sleep, or fantasizing about the next desireful adventure that I'm going to have. So, training this continuous awareness in whatever way you fancy, that's somehow the gateway.
And when you talk about a system, do you see Tantra as a system? When you talk about a system, do you mean Buddhism or a particular school of Buddhism, or what do you mean? Or do you think that all of them are valid in their own way, and just picking any of these is a way to get to this destination that you're talking about?
Yeah, I was actually contemplating exactly this question before I came here, because I thought we might talk about this, right? So I was thinking about this, let's say, place that Tantra takes within the spiritual realm, because you can look at it from two viewpoints. You can look at it historically, and then Tantra, as much as any other religion or philosophic stream or whatever it is, anything that is authentic and not just, to rip off people, but authentic explorations into life. Tantra is just one of them, right? It's just one particular type of yoga. Historically speaking, you would say, okay, it started then and then in the Indus Valley, and then it explored like this and like that, and then this is a stream, and this person sort of belongs to it, and so forth. But then if you think further of it, and you're like, okay, but how do you make this categorization? Because Ramakrishna never sat there and said, I'm a tantric. He said, I'm a lover of Kali. That makes him a Hindu. And then he said, I'm a lover of Allah. And that makes him Islamic. And then he said, I'm a lover of Christ. And that made him Christian. But what made him tantric? Why do people say that he's a tantric? Because he never made love. So that's not a point. He never, did any of these super crazy energetic things that sometimes are referred to as tantric practices, but actually he's one of the models within the tantric realm, because he lived in accordance with the principles that Tantra sort of suggests. And that's somehow the second way of looking upon Tantra, and understanding it much more as a set of principles, as a viewpoint. And then within those viewpoints you could apply a ton of practices. And eventually, actually, you will on the way lose that word of Tantra and actually see, okay, we're just dealing with a description of reality here that allows us to sort of perceive reality as it is, maybe a little faster than without this system, if you want to call it that way. So I was contemplating that, in fact, any path that you will choose, it will eventually become principally speaking, a tantric path, because eventually you will come to the place where you will ask yourself, okay, how does all this religious or philosophical exploration meet with life? Even if I meditated my entire life like Milarepa did, what's so tantric about Milarepa? He's sitting in a cave meditating. He's not in touch with life. No, but he brought it into life to the degree that he was able to fly and that he was able to, disappear and reappear and do all sorts of magic things and so forth. But simply ending on that path, because somehow all paths need to come to a conclusion where they meet life. And principally speaking, that's where all paths become somewhat tantric, because that's the principle of Tantra, bringing the spiritual into life.
Could you flesh that idea out a little bit more? Bring the spiritual into life?
Yeah, so if you look upon those people historically that called themselves tantrics, they were basically known to approach the entirety of creation as a tool to enlightenment. So other than negating life, as in moving to a cave, eating nettles, going to the monastery, sort of cutting ourselves out from life, they would explore into life, even to a crazy degree like the old Agoris were doing, and some of them are still around, who were sitting by the fireplace and smoking a huge chillum and then disappearing, because they would use and transmute and sublime the energy of that intense crazy experience, right? Or they would meditate sitting upon corpse to become aware of the sort of transience of life and of being. So coming from those very crazy approaches to sort of enter into creation and meditate upon the transcendent within creation, meditate upon the godly within creation, rather than going to a cave and meditating in peace somehow, meditating while you are smelling the scent of burning flesh on the next, funeral pyre, right? And from that, which is quite crazy approach, we sort of subtracted this principle of simply remaining fully in touch with life while exploring the spiritual dimension of our being within life. And that somehow means that we shift the entire viewpoint upon life, but we don't shift the actions. We don't need to stop doing certain things. Hence, tantrics have sex, and tantrics eat nice and fluffy food, or whatever, cake, or
I love fluffy food.
anything that you might desire. And tantrics travel, and tantrics enjoy life, and tantrics have jobs and families, and they enter creation, and remaining in creation, they find the divine. And this is sort of what this means, and it can be brought to an extreme point even, where then you find some of the old tantric masters, which were fishermen and were just working and tolling their whole lives, but then in the moment they died, they were described to just transform into golden light and disappear into a rainbow, which is basically the sign of being completely spiritually accomplished. But managing to do that just while cutting fish and going out on the sea. So this is sort of the ground principle of Tantra. You can be in life and not be swallowed by life. You can be in life and not be just sort of pushed around and reactive to its hassles and pleasures and things. But you can remain within life and in the same time be the observer of life. And with that, you come to what the Tantrics call the supreme asceticism. And that's actually how Tantra sometimes describes themselves. They say, guys, actually, we are the most celibatic, is that the word? Like if you apply celibacy, we are the,
celibate.
Yeah, we are the most celibate of all of us, because we remain completely in touch with the everythingness and with the transcendence of God while making love. You need to step out of making love in order to achieve that state. So who's the real person with celibacy here? Who's the real ascetic? And this is something that Tantra has brought forth a lot within, especially the biographies of saints and so forth, underlining this part, that actually you only come to a complete freedom of something if you're free of it while you're in it. And of course, this is a tricky, slippery slope, because you might be in it and not at all free and pretend you're ultra spiritual right there. but actually you're just wasting your life.
I'd like to go back to when you first started walking on this path. There's two things that I'm interested in, I guess, to know more about. One is how your life changed, because you mentioned, you were partying and, experimenting with drugs and stuff. Did you give all that up right away? Like, how did you embrace this path? How did that, happen for you? And what was the reaction to friends and family when you started getting more serious about Tantra?
Yeah, it's actually interesting and funny questions at once. So, the thing is about the drugs, alcohol, and so forth. That sort of, it already had sort of a drop, maybe a year before I found the path. And I just realized, maybe I don't have to smoke. And I just stopped smoking for like 10 months or something. It was not at all a problem. And then I felt, maybe I don't drink. And then I just stopped drinking. And like basically in the maybe 1.5 years going up to meeting the path, I had already stopped like a lot of the things, and I was not taking drugs and not doing anything. But then exactly maybe like 2 months before I actually decided to become part of that yoga school and really follow like a guided path, I had like a complete, rebound, like just completely going for it.
Relapse,
yeah. It was like something in my being just felt, okay, it's now or never. Try everything now, because after that it will be done. I had a little bit of a feeling like that because I was already, I had these 3 months of soul awakening. And after that, or like still in the, let's say in the last waves of that, I went to Australia for a few months just to check it out and to work there a bit and travel. And while I was there, I sort of became aware that something is really shifting inside, like really, really shifting. And I felt some sort of teenage part of me rebelling a little bit and being like, no, you have to just go wild completely for a while. So yeah, I went wild for about like 2-3 months and just took so much drugs. I mean, it's really enough for life. And never with needles, but anything else, whatever was on the table, I would take. And still somehow having the vibes coming from that time when my soul was so open and so awakened. I had these moments, like of course being on psychedelics, and then just realizing, okay, this is little taste of what I experienced then. Like I already had the comparison then. It was already like, no, when I'm actually clear in my mind, I can go much higher. And this is great, this is awesome, and I wanted to try it out. But it's incomparable to what awaits when I'm just going into my soul and going into my inner universe rather than sort of finding stimulants in the outer universe. So then once I came to the yogic and tantric path, and I first started off doing a lot of hatha yoga, then of course that has a lot of purification coming along with it, and it's suggested to stop with drugs and alcohol and smoking and all of that. So I just met that part of the path, and it was just the most natural thing to just stop everything. So I came from the most crazy drug-taking moment of my life, and I just stopped because I felt, okay, yeah, I had a nice time, and it's not of any relevance because I noticed already that my states are much higher when I'm clean in my head. So then I just stopped everything
including alcohol.
Everything within a few weeks. I mean, I've been a vegetarian since I was a child, but otherwise everything else, like cigarettes, alcohol, drugs, coffee, I stopped it all at once.
You don't miss a nice glass of red wine? I can give up everything, but wine, you don't miss that? And German wines, come on.
Yeah, I mean, there was something a bit sentimental inside of me about that. And then I would, periodically, I would go back home and sort of dive back into the world of my parents, who are these, intellectual, book-reading, wine-drinking type of half-healthy people. And I would be like, well, it's Christmas, let's have a glass of wine. And then I would drink that glass of wine, and I would enjoy that. Like, I would make sure to enjoy that. Good tantric, of course, like being present to it if already I'm being naughty. And then I just noticed, like attempting to drink a glass of wine, I noticed after 3 sips, A, my desire is fulfilled. B, it was totally not worth it, because I can feel with the subtle perceptions that I trained through yoga, I can feel by now just how hard it is actually on my structure. So at one point I was trying it again and again. Okay, Easter, let's have a glass of wine. Okay, 2 sips, totally not worth it. And I did that a few times, and then at one point I was like, I'm just not interested anymore. Like, I can't be bothered. Somehow I'd rather drink a glass of water and have a pleasure in that somehow. And it was the same with coffee, actually. There's a whole story with coffee where I sort of moved within the first 6 months of my yoga practice to a farm in Denmark in the middle of nowhere. So it was sort of, okay, if you want a really crappy coffee, because it's not allowed to drink it in the ashram, right? Then you got to go to the gas station on your bike for 5 kilometers. And I was like, okay, I don't need coffee that bad, right? And if you want a really good coffee, then you need to go, 2 hours on a train. So that was just not an option. So I wasn't drinking coffee for about 3 years. And that was the hardest for me, because I was really addicted to coffee. Like, I would go sometimes through 2-3 cans of coffee per day. So it was a thing for me. And then after about 3 years, I was one winter afternoon in London, in central London, just like stepping out of the subway and just being such a beautiful sunny day and the crisp air. Somehow breathing that and just feeling so free, being in London and just being on a trip, and somehow feeling all bohemian about myself. And I was passing by a coffee shop, and just I felt so sentimental about it. And I was like, okay, I'm going to have one really good coffee now. And then I thought, okay, I'm a yogi by now. I need to have something that is really dialed down with a lot of milk. So I had some frappuccino situation there. And I stepped out with this coffee in my hand because I wanted to enjoy it in the beautiful London scenery with the air and everything. And I gloriously prepared myself for the first sip. And I drank this first sip, and I will never forget it. It was literally milk with a homeopathic amount of coffee in it. And immediately my entire subtle energetic system contracted. And I started to have cold sweats, and my spine was just going completely crazy, and I was standing there starting to shake. And I was like, okay, no, I'm going to have this coffee. I deserve this coffee. And my mind was like, I'm not having this stupid reaction of my body. So I was trying to have another sip, and just smelling the coffee, my body reacted again super heavily, and then I just threw it away. So what I recommend is just, just be aware. Like, if you're having a cigarette aware, you will have 5 more, and then you stop, because you just notice what is doing to you, and that the pleasure of it is totally not at all outweighing, not even coming close to the negative effects that it has on your state of mind, and how you feel about yourself in that very moment. So for me, that was the way to sort of figure that out, by being aware.
That's not a bad name for like a hipster coffee shop, Frappuccino situation. I like it. I like it.
We have a new business model.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Again, I interrupted you. We got derailed. How did friends and family react when you started getting more serious about this path? Because I think this is something that a lot of people actually, incline to experiment with different spiritual paths. I think this is a big concern for a lot of people. Yeah. What was your experience of that? Or should I say, what has your experience been of that?
Yeah, so my family is generally very, very open and very liberal somehow, and very open for me to just experiment and try out my life. Yet when I came to be all of a sudden so crazy different from what they knew me to be, as in, stopping drugs, stopping smoking, stopping coffee, stopping all sorts of things that I used to enjoy doing somehow, I would come home sometimes over Christmas and be fasting, and they would be like, what's wrong with you? Like, it's like you're not enjoying life anymore, and so forth. So there was a lot of struggle. I don't want to call it conflict. It was more like my family struggling with it, because they were not like pushing me, because they are sweet. Yet I could feel how much it concerns them. And then, of course, being in the beginning of my 20s, it was also like, okay, now what? I'm finding myself here, and my family can't grasp it. What will I do with that? But then eventually, one of the wonderful, wonderful teachers in my path, a female teacher, she said to me, look, it's not a must for your family to understand you and for you to understand your family, but it's a must to love your family and for your family to love you. So start focusing on that. In the beginning, I tried to explain a lot of the stuff that I was doing, and some of it definitely my family resonated with, like the whole idea of love and of connection and of just being and accepting yourself. They could totally resonate with that. And my brother, even in the beginning of my path, he had his own explorations into yoga, so we were sharing some stuff. And even though that didn't continue for him, there was sort of like a common base. But it was sort of like there's a threshold where they were like, okay, we are out. I mean, if you want to do, become a crazy tantric nun, then suit yourself. But that's not something that we can really fully understand, right? So my mother got quite worried at one point, because then I moved to Denmark. I wasn't so available anymore. Also, I was just a stupid kid not answering the phone properly and all that sort of stuff. So she started to really get worried.
And what were you doing in Denmark?
I was actually moving to Denmark after 6 months of entering into yoga to start dedicating my life to yoga and become a teacher. So I started all sorts of teacher trainings just very early on in my path. And as they are offered in Denmark, and I anyway felt an inclination to be in a bigger community, then I felt that's just perfect. I'll just move to Denmark, be integrated in a bigger community, huge school, and just work in the frame of that yoga school and learn a lot of good things from really elevated teachers, and also do my teacher trainings. So I was just fully integrated in Denmark for a few years. And yeah, my mom freaked a bit out in that time. She came to visit and it was fine, but also she couldn't really grasp what I was doing and why I was living on a mattress in the attic of some crazy ashram, like other 6 women living around me as well, just because there was a lack of space. So I was like, I don't care, I sleep in the attic, just give me a mattress and I would want to stay here, because I felt this dedication inside somehow. So, cutting a long story short, she went to some seminars and events to understand how it is when people get lost into a sect or into a cult. And of course that was freaking her out even more in the beginning. But then actually at one point she stopped going to these seminars, and I was actually just noticing like a few months later, and then I asked her, Mom, what's going on? You're not going anymore to the seminars to figure out if something is wrong with me. And she said, no, I stopped that. And I was like, why is that? And then she said, they said to me, like one of the major points that they said to me in these seminars is, you will see that gradually your child degenerates. Gradually it will just get worse and worse, and sort of this burden of a cult just weighing on them and just getting more and more absorbed into that. And she says, look, each time I see you, you just look more healthy, more happy, more radiant, more alive, more yourself. So I was like, why would I worry about that? Even, you don't pick your phone sometimes, but you didn't do that either before. So what's the big difference, right? And with that, they came to terms with it. But I'm also just really lucky to have a wise and intelligent family that just looks at the things and understands, okay, that might be very out of the ordinary choices that she's making, but let's live with that, and let's just observe how good it is for her.
And I really like the way you put that. It's not necessary to understand or be understood by your family, but it's essential to love them. I feel like a lot of people's sanity could be saved if they, including my own, if we could embody that idea more and more. So I guess I'm trying to condense a lot of questions down into one, but I'm curious how your relationships changed as you went further down this path. Like, how are your relationships, for example, today different than they were before you found the tantric path, would you say? How has Tantra impacted your relationships, whether that's friendships or intimate relationships or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, you heard already the relationship with my family, and I feel the main thing that I really learned, especially from that beautiful sentence of my teacher, just learning to love them more. I feel the love that I have for my family is just so much more. I feel I'm allowing myself to love them fully, because I feel I don't have to be any more engaged in this conflict, whether or not we share the same ideas or political views or whatever it is, or whether they understand me or not in the first place. It's just a relationship that is mainly based on love. And then sure, it has some other dimensions to it, supporting each other and caring for each other and all that. But the main basis of everything is just it coming from love. And I feel it really allowed me to come especially close to my mother. Like, I mean, I've always been close to my mother, but I feel it allowed me to somehow see her in a completely different light, and seeing her innate spirituality as a woman, just being a woman. Somehow she had so many intuitive moments of meeting the divine and of feeling her soul. And even though she might not be able to relate to it when I talk to her about it in my terms, but she experiences the exact same thing. And even though we might never be able to have a discussion about it, I feel it, and I feel our connection in that. And being able to focus on that, again, somehow going out of this linear and more judgmental and separated way of thinking, where you sort of try to match the others to what you believe. If you just feel the other and you're just with them in that moment, then sort of the souls can meet, and you can have an intimacy that is completely new. And I feel this is really something that I achieved with my family, that by now we have a very, very intimate connection. And even if we tease each other for what we do and for what we don't do, and we might, sometimes have a discussion on a subject, but there's just continuously this underlying feeling of love. And especially with my brother, I feel somehow that I know him for a very, very long time. So we share this new intimacy that is not just mentally built like it was before, sharing friends and viewpoints and music tastes and so on, but now it's like a real deep connection that I discovered for myself. With my father, actually, it allowed me to come into a completely new way of even communicating with him. I felt that my father was my whole life not very open to actually communicate. It was more like him speaking and us listening, or us freaking out because we had enough of listening to him somehow. And then when I came to a place of, again, just feeling his soul and understanding that some of the things he did in his life, he did because he couldn't do better, or he did because he thought it was the best thing to do in that moment, and sort of developing a new forgiveness and compassion for my parents, and especially for my father. All of a sudden we started to actually speak, to have actual dialogue, which was literally not possible before. So when I noticed that, then I understood how powerful it is to change your inner attitude and just to work on yourself. And then when you connect in a different way, then the others, they cannot resist. When you sort of touch the soul of the other, they cannot resist. They will answer from the soul, and they will be with you from the soul, and then share themselves with you in a way that, again, will completely blow your mind and touch you and make you learn something completely new about life. Talking about friendships is very similar for me, just like a newfound intimacy with friends. Again, understanding that they will not understand me, most of them don't. But actually by now I feel I'm very often in a position of being able to give something to them that was unexpected to both of us when meeting, just because I feel them in the moment, and I feel I can sort of react to something in them that is underlying and that is not outspoken and that is maybe not very obvious, but still we can sort of get there just by feeling rather than thinking, and by connecting from soul to soul. And at the level of romantic relationships, I mean, all the above obviously apply as well. But then, apart from that, learning about also having a completely new view upon sexuality and a new view upon relationship in itself, that it doesn't need to be defined in a very particular way, and also that you don't need to follow any type of dogma, no matter into what direction, but that you can just relate directly without the interference of mind and of concepts and dogmas and society and whatnot, or expectations and attachments, but you can just relate then and there and see what happens somehow. And that again brought me to a completely new level of faith, because as much as I felt this faith into the mystery of the universe, I didn't necessarily feel a faith into people before the yoga, and also years into the yoga I didn't feel that. But this is something that I feel awakened in time, somehow becoming more and more aware how we are all connected to that same universal background, like the universe peopling around, and becoming aware of that. And the romantic relationship somehow creates a certain freedom, for sure, but also a completely mind-boggling depth of connection and intimacy, literally at times feeling myself literally one with the other. And I'm not just talking about the oneness of the genitals, but really the oneness of soul and the oneness of the essence of the being somehow. I would have moments, actually both with friends and with intimate relationships, where I just feel like I don't even need to talk to you. I don't even need to express anything, because you feel. I feel that we feel the same. It's the same thing. There's no need to speak. There's no need to explain. There's no need to have any conflicts, because it's already understood on this background that is beyond this illusion of separation somehow.
I have a question that is largely selfish in nature, because I want to understand this better, and I'm not entirely sure I do. When I was talking with Uriel, we were talking a little bit about sexual continence for men. How is sexual continence for women different than sexual continence for men?
So,
And what is sexual continence? We should probably talk about that.
So when we talk about sexual continence, we talk basically about relating to sexuality in a way that it will support your spiritual evolution. May that be, like the sentence that I just said, it might be applied in abstinence, refraining from sexuality, but then alchemizing, using, controlling that energy that you keep inside by not engaging in lovemaking, and then supporting your spiritual quest with that. Or you could choose continence, where you stay sexually active, and yet within the sexual act you will already start transmuting, subliming, as it is said so beautifully, controlling the energy, essentially moving the energy around in you, so there's no need to lose it anymore. And practically that means for a guy to stop ejaculating. I think that became quite clear already last time. And it also means to have these deep, multiple inner orgasms that are not linked with ejaculation. And for a woman, essentially within the lovemaking game, it means the same thing. It means refraining from losing sexual energy within the sexual act. Of course, with us ladies, always a bit more complicated, everything. So it's not so obvious, like, oh, a substance came out, ergo, I did something loosey here. But rather it's like perceiving that your energetic level is lowering after having what is called an explosive orgasm, an orgasm with energetic discharge. Whereas when you have an inner orgasm as a woman, you will sort of remain at the same level of arousal, and then even strengthening your arousal as you continue with the lovemaking game after an orgasm. So that's the lovemaking part of feminine or female continence. And then there is the part of obviously gradually coming to keep the sexual discharge of women, which is the menstruation, inside your being as well. It's a bit more complex process, as you can imagine, which starts with harmonizing the whole experience of the menstruation, so making it painless and relatively short, with not crazy amounts of blood loss, but having what also Ayurveda considers a harmonious bleeding, would be something between 1 and 5 days maximum, and just be light bleeding and not connected to any pain, basically just discharging what needs to go out of the body and be done with it. So that would be stage 1. And then stage 2 of this process would be to let's say activate your capacity to reabsorb energy, which physically translates into activating the lymphatic ducts in the uterus, that then the skin of the uterus is building up throughout the month, but not as fully, still building up, but then is resorbed back into the lymphatic ducts. And then you could even go one level more into the same with the egg, so you don't even have an ovulation, because actually this is something that happens once per month for every woman, as it is a little cloud of eggs that initially starts to grow within the ovary, and then the strongest egg, or for some women 2 or 3 or 5 or 30 eggs sort of come to fruition and become big, and then jump or make the ovulation, so to say. And the rest of that little cloud of eggs is resorbed back into the tissues of the ovaries, which is why when you look at the skin inside of the ovary, it looks like scar tissue, because there's this continuous resorption of actual matter happening. And then if you come to a place of controlling that, which obviously you can imagine how subconscious that process works, when you come to controlling that, then you can resorb the entirety of eggs back into your system and then use them as free energy. And then the same with the mucous skin of the uterus. So that would be the high level of continence for women, would be to accomplish that. And you can imagine that the amount of sexual energy that such a woman would hold inside of her, if you just think of a PMSing woman, how crazy that can be. It's because she's overly...
I don't know what you're talking about, Blandine.
It's because she's overly charged with sexual energy, right? And she doesn't know where to put it because her system is not able yet to contain it. Then imagine the intensity of a PMS type of woman on a continuous base, but expressed harmoniously, meaning expressed in ecstasy, expressed in juiciness, expressed in the capacity to have orgasms, to help her lover transform, and so forth. So then we would acquire a completely new level somehow of womanhood even.
You use that word a lot, juicy and juiciness. I'm curious, what does that word mean to you? What are you talking about there? I think I know what you mean, but
Yeah, so basically, like, technically, I'm speaking about a strong and harmonious charge of a person or a situation or a connection with sexual energy. That's basically what I'm talking about. But sometimes people have this idea that when we talk about sexual energy, it's just strictly related to how horny am I, or how hard does it get, or how wet does it get, which surely is related, right? But actually sexual energy, not just within Tantra, but also within Taoism and other systems, is basically the expression of life force in our being. So when you have a person that is strongly sexually charged, they will not just be more wet and more hard and more long-lasting or more horny, but actually it will express, if it's a harmonious build-up of energy, it will express in the entirety of their lives. They will just be turned on by life, and they will be juicy, so to say, in everything they do. So I like to use this word because it sort of moves a little bit away from this continuous over-sexifying of this term of sexual energy, because actually it's creative energy that expresses inside. And sure, it comes out in a sensual body and sensual expression, but it also comes out in just feeling turned on by life and just being alive and having a spark in your eye.
And it conjures images of fruit for me, and I love fruit, so I like the word a lot. Yeah, I like the way you use it.
Yeah, and I mean the fruit is the fruit of sexual expression of a plant, right?
So we don't have a lot of time left, and I have many more questions to ask you, so I think we're going to have to do this again sometime. But I'd like to know more, and again, Uriel and I touched on this a little bit. I'd like to know more about some of the dangers of walking this path, or the downside to Tantra. What is your take on that? Like, do you have any thoughts on who should not pursue this path, or challenges you've faced, or whatever?
Yeah, I actually listened to the podcast, and I was smiling at this question somehow, because I mean it is a very valid and a very good point, and I liked very much the way that Uriel answered it. Somehow, I don't recall exactly what he was saying, but he was pointing out that there's basically a danger of fooling yourself, right? Like, that's in essence how he was putting it. There's a danger of just, for example, please pardon my French, if you are fucking around all over the place, and then you say, well, it's because I'm so open and I'm so polyamorous, and look at me somehow. And you forget about essential principles like love and so forth. And of course, that is, so to say, a danger, if you want to put it that way. I mean, a danger as in, remaining involved in the illusions of creation, remaining somehow subjugated to suffering and to, everything the Buddha is talking about, that, all the attachments that we don't want to have anymore if we want to somehow reach enlightenment. So dangerous in that sense. If you look at just living a life, a mediocre life, or having a juicy life in that sense, as in just, enjoying a bit your sexual impulses a bit more freely, there's certainly nothing wrong with that. And in the Osho community, you will find somehow a lot of those expressions, let's say. People sort of freeing themselves to a degree sexually, and sort of freeing also some inhibitions at the emotional level, which allows them just to live just a bit more freely and happy and so forth, and maybe also a bit more indulgently and so forth. But danger, is it really a danger? It is a danger if you are searching for enlightenment, because then you can, sort of, if you want to take that image, walk around the foot of the mountain 150,000 times. And with that energy, you could have already been at the peak of the mountain, as in already enlightened, but you were wasting your time just going about another skirt and another piece of cake and another job and another family reunion and another thing, and sort of forgetting the path, forgetting the direction of all these wonderful things that you do in your life, to be aligned towards the peak of the mountain, so that they actually have a spiritual consequence for you. So the danger lies in, well, you will just not make it, right? And you will waste a ton of time, because creation is so nice and so beautiful and so illusory and so sweet. So you can just spend a whole lot of time in it. So as in dangers, I only see it as a spiritual danger somehow. Because, if you, let's say you come to a Tantra course and you learn a bit to hold in your energy and, be a bit more long-lasting in the bedroom, and you still ejaculate every now and again. Sure, you have a good life. There's nothing wrong with that. But you will not reach the top of the mountain. And probably the danger, as Uriel described it, that Neo-Tantra and Californian Tantra brings along with it, is that it claims that you can go all the way, or sort of, there is no more other place to go after this somehow, which is a bit of a problem of the New Age movement in general. Just to say, just relax, just be present, sure, just be slow in your lovemaking, and just put some incense sticks and make a orgy with drawing a lottery, to be all spontaneous about it. But missing out on the essential principles that would allow you to do all these wonderful things, if you so wish to do them, will make you miss out on the essential goal of reaching the top of the mountain. But somehow Tantra, as Uriel also described, it remains hidden from the common eye. It's I was actually thinking on my way here of this very common saying that before enlightenment, the rivers are rivers and the valleys are valleys. And then on the path, the rivers are no longer rivers and the valleys are no longer valleys. And then at enlightenment, the rivers are rivers and the valleys are valleys. And basically, Tantra aims and even claims the tantric path only starts when the rivers have become rivers again and the valleys have become valleys again, because it only starts with the awakening of the soul, where actually you're doing the same stuff as before, but it is entirely different. It is not at all the same. And people sort of vulgarized not just this path, but a lot of paths by just saying, hey, I have a smart idea. Let's skip the stage in between, where the rivers are not rivers and the valleys are not valleys. And when you do that, you're just staying on square one and you pretend you're moving forward. So, it's a very big spiritual danger in practicing Tantra, but in the same time, it is also the shortest and most efficient of all the possible paths. So, it's a choice there.
Do you agree that you can attain higher states of presence, consciousness, satori, enlightenment in tantric sex than you can during meditation?
Yes, obviously. Yeah.
Really? Because I still struggle with that idea a little bit.
Yes. So I was just sharing with a friend of mine, actually, who is into Vipassana and also is flirting with Zen a little bit. And he's one of these very dry, masculine characters, right? That just fits perfectly for that type of path, just sit and meditate and so forth. And I was sharing with him that I'm in the process of completing a Tantra teacher training currently in Denmark, and it is an amazing, amazing journey, offering a lot of initiations that I have never encountered before, actually, that are specially tailored for Tantra teachers and people that really, really want to go all the way. And after having already quite a bunch of modules, actually now was module 6, so we had already 50 days spread out over 3.5 years of very, very intense, liking the word, juicy, full-on, intense, sensual practice. Of course, also doing yoga and so forth, but also enjoying really life and really going into the intensity of the tantric path, the intensity of tantric ritual and so forth. And now in this, basically one of the last 2 modules of this course, all of a sudden our teacher said, all right, and now the real thing. And then he gives us these meditation methods that I can unfortunately not in depth talk about, but that are extremely zen in their approach, extremely simple. And then I understood, if I wouldn't have walked all the craziness of the lovemaking, of the ritual, of the this, of the that, up to here, I could not acquire this high state. I was just entering into extremely elevated states out of nowhere, basically, within these meditation practices that we did. And I understood somehow exactly this little quote that I gave you with the valleys and the rivers, that somehow you need to be able to acquire meditative states in meditation if you want to go for the real meditative states in meditation. That's the funny thing of it. Somehow you cannot fool it on the yoga mat and then not be able to do it in the bedroom. So obviously they go together, and within your practice, within your path, you might find that when you're sitting still on a cushion, you can go into certain states, and when you're penetrating dynamically, you can enter into other states. But eventually they come together, and that's the whole point, right? That you want to sort of, in Tantra, you embrace continuously all the extremes. So you learn to meditate deeply. A tantric that doesn't meditate and only makes love, I'm sorry, is not a tantric, unless is meditating during lovemaking. Then we are talking, right? And same the other way around. A tantric that is only meditating, never making love, that's not a tantric, unless it's making love during meditation with the divine feminine herself in all her splendor, like Milarepa, for example, did.
I have 3 more very quick questions for you. So as you may have heard with Uriel, sometimes I like to get my guests to complete these sentences. So I'll ask you to please complete these sentences with 1 or 2 words and sort of the first things that come to mind. The quality or characteristic I find most attractive in the opposite sex is?
Purpose. Purpose and presence.
I would most like to be remembered as?
Light.
Love is?
God. And God is love.
Thank you very much, Blandine. That was great. There you have it, my friends. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Blandine. And I'll remind you once again that if you'd like to learn more about Blandine and the absolutely wonderful Tantra Yoga school she teaches at here in Chiang Mai, go to tantrayogathailand.com. I'll also remind you that you can find links to everything we talked about today. You can find more information about me and the show and everything I'm doing at humansinlove.com. So for the last time in 2018, I am signing off. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who has listened to the show this year, who has sent me an email encouraging me, who has left a rating and review. All that stuff makes a big difference to me and my life, and it really inspires me to keep going. I'm really pleased. As a motorcycle drives past, I think it's gone now. I'm really pleased about the response the show has had so far, and we're growing slowly but surely, which is always encouraging. And I'm feeling really good about the future of this show, because I feel like this model that I'm slowly putting together for this show is more sustainable for me long term. And I feel like I'm finding my feet as a podcaster more and more, and I'm really excited about what the new year will bring. So once again, please be sure you subscribe to the show if you haven't already to keep track of what's coming up in January.